Welcome to Sleepy Historian, where old tales whisper by candlelight, and memories gently drift into dreams. Tonight, let us journey back to a time long asleep in history. Cixi, the Empress Dowager, once a humble concubine in the Qing court, rose to become the most powerful woman in imperial China. For nearly half a century, she ruled the empire from behind the Golden Curtain. She was the embodiment of cunning and command, a master of survival and control. And in the final chapter of China's imperial age, her name became both legend and controversy. In the year 1835, a girl was born into a modest Manchu noble family of the Ye Nara clan. Her name, Cixi. Her father served as a minor official in the Qing court. Not powerful, not royal, but enough to give her a refined education. She learned the art of poetry, the elegance of ceremony, and the quiet rhythms of palace life. By the age of 16, in 1851, she was chosen to join the Forbidden City, not as a queen, nor a consort of high rank, but as a low-ranking concubine, a noble lady in title, yet humble in station. But this girl, Cixi, was different. She did not complain, she observed. She watched the higher-ranked consorts, learned from their power games. She memorized the intricacies of court politics, and always she smiled, patiently. She knew how to charm the emperor, not just with beauty, but with clever words, soft wit, and quiet strength. In the harem where rivalry whispered through silk screens and ambition brewed in shadows, Cixi began building alliances, not enemies. A glance, a word, a favor returned. She understood. The palace was a game of survival. Then came the turning point. She gave birth to the emperor's first son, the future Tongzhi emperor. With that child, her life changed forever. She rose swiftly through the ranks, from noble lady to consort, from consort to honored consort, until finally, she stood as the noble consort Yi. And then, Empress Dowager, the mother of the next emperor, no longer just a woman in the palace. She had become a key figure in the empire itself. Though still behind curtains, she now stood next to the throne. From a humble girl to the silent architect of power, Cixi had begun her long ascent. She knew the truth of the Forbidden City. To survive was not enough. One must also conquer. In the year 1861, Emperor Shanfeng died young. He left the throne to his only son just 6 years old. The child became the Tongzhi emperor. Before his passing, Shanfeng appointed 8 regents, trusted high officials meant to rule on behalf of the boy emperor. But Cixi, now the noble consort and the emperor's mother, refused to be a mere onlooker in this game of power. In the chaos of imperial transition, Cixi saw her chance. She reached out to an unlikely ally, Empress Dowager Shanfeng's wife, and 2 powerful princes, Prince Gong and Prince Chen. Together, they wove a secret plan, a court coup that would shake the Forbidden City from within. Cixi played her role with quiet brilliance. She feigned illness, appeared weak, while carefully maneuvering behind the scenes. With stealth and swiftness, they struck. The Xinyu coup was launched, a silent storm behind palace doors. The regents were seized. Power shifted in mere hours. Cixi, just months after the emperor's death, emerged victorious. From that day forward, she stood as co-regent with Empress Dowager Cixi. But Cixi was gentle, quiet, not one to wield ambition. Cixi, however, was sharp, decisive. She moved through court politics like a river carving stone. Now, the mother of a child emperor, Cixi controlled appointments, diplomacy, and military policy. And though it was just the beginning, her hand was already upon the reins of an empire. After the successful coup of 1861, Empress Dowagers Cixi and Cixi were named co-regents for the young Emperor Tongzhi, only 6 years old. But between these 2 women, only one truly held the reins of the empire. Cixi. Cixi wasted no time. With quiet resolve, she placed trusted allies into key government posts. From the inner court to the imperial household department, she slowly replaced those still loyal to the ousted regents. Though she held no royal title like emperor, Cixi ruled over everything: appointments, state policies, and even the final approval of imperial documents. During Tongzhi's early reign, Cixi often sat behind a silk screen beside Sion, listening to ministers present their reports. This practice was known as Kui Lian Tingjung, listening to state affairs behind a curtain. Though she was unseen, her voice decided the fate of officials, the direction of the nation. At the same time, Cixi crafted the image of a loving mother, gentle and protective of her young son. But in truth, she was guarding the throne and her place upon it. She knew, if her son lost power, so would she. Beyond the palace walls, China was under immense pressure from foreign powers, a legacy of 2 opium wars. Debates in court grew louder. Should China reform, or stay conservative, open its gates, or shut them? Cixi remained still. She never sided too strongly. She let the court divide, and in their division, her power grew stronger. Step by step, Cixi transformed from a shadow behind the curtain to the true iron figure of the Qing Dynasty. In a world where women were forbidden to rule, she rewrote the rules, not with sword, but with mind and cold wisdom. As the Tongzhi emperor grew older, many in the court hoped the young ruler would step out of his mother's shadow and finally take charge. But hopes soon turned into quiet disappointment. Raised in a palace shaped by control and caution, Tongzhi lacked the strength and the political will. In 1873, when he formally took the throne, he quickly fell into a life of luxury, pleasure over principle. Cixi slowly gave up power in name only. But behind the scenes, she still held the reins. Tongzhi felt suffocated, trapped in the shadow of a mother who never truly stepped aside. He tried to assert himself, launching decisions on his own. But most were ill-planned. One famous example: his costly attempt to rebuild the Summer Palace, Yuan Mingyuan, destroyed by Anglo-French troops. Cixi strongly opposed this plan. To her, it was reckless, a waste of the empire's strained treasury. Tensions between mother and son grew colder. Tongzhi withdrew from state matters and sought comfort in drink, brothels, and indulgence. His spirit dimmed. His health began to fail. By the end of 1874, he fell gravely ill. The official record said smallpox, but whispers in the corridors told another story: a venereal disease. From a life out of control. In early 1875, the Tongzhi emperor died, just 18 years old. His sudden death sent shockwaves through the Forbidden City. With no heir, the throne stood empty. A succession crisis loomed. Tradition said another prince should rule, but that would leave Cixi with nothing. As always, Cixi already had a plan. She would not allow tragedy to end her power. Instead, she would transform it into yet another turning point in her silent reign. The sudden death of the Tongzhi emperor in 1875 plunged the Qing court into crisis. He had no heir, and the princes of the Isenjoro clan, none pleased Cixi or the ministers. If a grown prince took the throne, Cixi's power would shrink, perhaps disappear altogether. But she was never one to leave things to chance. She made a bold and unexpected move. She proposed Zaishan, just 3 years old, the son of Prince Chen Yuxuan. Yuxuan, younger brother of the late Emperor Shanfeng, was also Cixi's old ally from the coup years ago. Zaishan was the perfect choice. A child with no voice of his own, a little figure on a great throne, and Cixi, once more, would be regent. This boy would become Emperor Guangxu, later central to China's great transformations at the end of the century. But the decision wasn't easy. Many voices in court protested. It was unheard of to choose an heir from a side branch of the royal line, and he wasn't even a true son, he was adopted. Yet Cixi knew how to move among whispers. With clever persuasion and firm hands, she gained the support of her allies and of Empress Dowager Cixi. The court gave in. Some agreed, others were quietly silenced. The boy ascended, Guangxu was crowned. Cixi became regent again, But this time, she stood alone. Sion would pass away a few years later. By placing a child on the throne, Cixi had written a new chapter, not just for the Qing Dynasty, but for her own reign, which would now stretch on for decades to come. With the young Guangxu emperor on the throne as an adopted son, Empress Dowager Cixi once again rose to ultimate power, but this time she shared it with no one. After the death of Empress Dowager Sion in 1881, Cixi ruled as sole regent. She did not wear the crown, but the court called her Old Buddha, a title of deep reverence, given only to the true master of the empire. Though she never sat upon the throne, Cixi held more power than any emperor. She continued to rule through Kui Lian Ting Zheng. Listening behind the yellow curtain, every decree passed bore her judgment. In her quiet reign from the inner court, Cixi proved herself a master of statecraft. She maintained stability after crisis, balancing powerful factions, managing tension between reform and tradition. She enacted moderate reforms, military, financial, administrative, just enough to strengthen the system, not enough to threaten her rule. But her conservatism grew clearer. She valued order above innovation. While the world raced ahead, Japan modernized. The West advanced through Asia. Cixi's court remained slow, ceremonial, and dangerously out of step. Instead of investing in the nation's future, Cixi diverted precious funds to rebuild palaces, restore pleasure gardens, and even used naval funds to construct the Summer Palace. Critics accused her of decadence. Too many. Cixi became a symbol, not of strength, but of stagnation. From deep within the Forbidden City, she continued to steer the empire, with cunning, resolve, and at times, ruthless force. But beneath the stillness, currents were shifting. Storm clouds gathered over China. The greatest political upheaval in centuries was about to begin. By the end of the 19th century, as the world surged forward, China remained locked in crisis and decline. The bitter loss to Japan in the Sino-Japanese War, 1894-1895, sparked a wave of reformist cries from scholars and progressive officials. Amid this unrest, a passionate reformer rose to prominence. Kong Yui. He and his students, like Liang Qichao, proposed bold reforms in administration, military, education, and the economy. The young Guangxu emperor, now grown, found inspiration in their vision. He, too, longed to modernize China, to save the empire from collapse. In 1898, Guangxu launched the 100 Days Reform, a whirlwind of change that shook the court. Old exams were abolished. Modern schools opened. The bureaucracy was reshaped. Industry expanded under Western models. But the speed of change alarmed the old guard. Conservative officials resisted, and at the center of their unease was Empress Dowager Cixi. To Cixi, these reforms were not renewal. They were rebellion, a direct threat to the power she had spent decades shaping. Though she had once allowed minor reforms, she would not accept being cast aside by a young emperor seizing control. Swiftly and silently, Cixi struck back. A military coup was launched. Guangxu was seized and imprisoned on Yingtai Island, within the Summer Palace. Key reformers were executed. Tan Sitong met the blade. Kong Yue and Liang Qichao fled into exile. The reform collapsed. Power returned to Cixi. Once more, she proved a simple truth in politics. Gentleness may win hearts, but only ruthlessness keeps the throne. At the dawn of the 20th century, as the world entered the age of industry, China remained lost in inner crisis. Foreign empires and Japan carved out her coasts and markets. Inside the nation, discontent simmered at the court's weakness and foreign domination. From this unrest, a grassroots movement rose in northern China. The Boxers, the righteous and harmonious fists. They were martial arts groups who vowed to expel the Qing, expel the foreigners. They believed fervently that patriotism and martial skill could defeat the Western guns. Superstition mixed with fury. and the movement spread like wildfire. At first, the Qing court saw the Boxers as rebels, but in desperation, Cixi made a shocking choice. She decided to support them, hoping they would ignite a nationalist flame, strong enough to drive out foreign influence. In 1900, the Boxer uprising exploded. Bands of fighters flooded into Beijing, waving red flags, burning churches, killing foreigners and Chinese Christians alike. Under Boxer pressure, Cixi declared war on the eight-nation alliance: Britain, France, Germany, Russia, the US, Japan, Italy, and Austria-Hungary. It was a dangerous gamble, but the result was disaster. Qing troops were no match. For modern Western armies, Beijing fell. The forbidden city was looted and defiled. Cixi and the Guangxu emperor fled the capital in shame. Disguised, humiliated, chased by the ghosts of a broken dynasty. The Qing court was forced to sign the Boxer Protocol in 1901, one of the most punishing treaties in Chinese history. Hundreds of millions in silver paid as indemnity, foreign troops stationed in the capital, and more sovereign power lost. The Boxer Rebellion marked the greatest mistake of Cixi's long reign. Her decision to harness the rage of the people against the firepower of the modern world pushed the fragile Qing Empire one step closer to the edge of collapse. After the bitter failure of the Boxer Rebellion and the signing of the Boxer Protocol in 1901, Empress Dowager Cixi finally saw the truth. Conservatism and delay could no longer preserve the Qing dynasty. Upon returning to Beijing, the woman once seen as the enemy of reform began to shift her stance. Unexpectedly, she allowed sweeping changes she had long resisted. In her final years, Cixi initiated what became known as the New Policies Tan Chnh. She reformed education, abolished the 1,000-year-old civil service exams, and embraced Western-style schools. She sent students to study in Japan and Europe, expanded infrastructure, modernized the military, and even laid plans for a future constitutional monarchy. In 1908, Cixi issued a set of edicts calling for a national constitution and the formation of a parliament within 9 years, a final effort to save monarchy in an age of democracy. But these changes came too late. The Qing bureaucracy was already rotting, corruption was rampant, and the people had lost faith, broken by defeat and foreign humiliation. All across China, revolutionary movements rose up, inspired by new ideas and anger toward the old world. Cixi, once the iron hand behind the throne, now sat alone in the summer palace, old ill still clinging to her final threads of power. Deep inside, she knew the empire was broken, beyond repair. On November 15, 1908, the Guangxu emperor died suddenly. And just one day later, Cixi followed, two rulers, gone together, closing a long, tumultuous chapter in China's imperial history. Empress Dowager Cixi, a woman who rose from the lowly rank of concubine to become the de facto ruler of China for nearly half a century, remains one of the most controversial figures in Chinese history. Her death in 1908 marked not only the end of a life, but the twilight of the Qing dynasty. Just 3 years later, in 1911, the Xinhai Revolution erupted. The Qing China's last imperial dynasty collapsed. The Republic of China was born. For many, this marked the final failure of Cixi's late reforms. Historians remain divided. Some condemn her as a reactionary, one who blocked reform, used power for personal preservation, and stood in the way of national progress. She crushed the 100 Days Reform, silenced reformers, and imprisoned her adopted son, Emperor Guangxu, the very emperor she had placed on the throne. Her support for the Boxer Rebellion, a desperate move against foreign domination, led to catastrophic consequences for the nation. Yet, others see brilliance in her survival, a woman of extraordinary intelligence and political instinct, in a world ruled by men. For decades, through foreign threats and court intrigues, Cixi maintained relative stability. To her defenders, She was a rare iron-willed woman who knew when to yield and when to strike. Her legacy is a painting of light and shadow. She was both the sharp mind in chaos and the cautious hand that slowed China's transformation. Cixi was more than an individual. She was a mirror of her era, of an empire torn between the old world and a new one rushing in. Whether praised or blamed, her image lingers. The woman who ruled behind the Golden Curtain, etched forever in the memory of China, Empress Dowager Cixi passed into history, leaving behind a legacy both grand and conflicted. She was the final symbol of imperial power and of resistance to change, whether judged harshly or remembered with awe. Her presence remains an unshakable chapter in the story of modern China. Tonight's story comes to a close. If your eyes have gently shut, then I wish you a deep, peaceful sleep until we meet again in the next dream.